So Dave, Hulk Hogan makes the jump in July 1994 to World Championship Wrestling, signs the contract, the ticker tape parade, beats Ric Flair at Bash at the Beach, and comes Starrcade. He's got the championship, and he's looking across the ring at old pal Ed Leslie. We'll talk about that choice of matchup in a second, but first, when Hulk Hogan comes into WCW in 1994, let's set the table. Was the thinking that he'd turn things around for sure, or was it an open question?
It was a question. It was a question. I think that Hogan was, in those days, the pay-per-views were very much built around the star. And I mean, you could look, when Hogan came in, the pay-per-views turned around immediately. And Hogan got an incredible contract. It was 25% of the pay-per-view, of the pay-per-view gross to come in. So, they brought him in to be the saving grace. And at first, didn't really work, even though the pay-per-views went way, way up. They were paying him so much, and in other aspects of the business, the ratings didn't go up at all. I remember that the ticker tape parade, that rating that week was like, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was like a 1.9. I mean, it was a bad number. And there were a lot of times Hogan would be on TV and it would be a bad number. He did not move the ratings at first. In time, obviously, the place exploded, but that was years later. But I think the Hogan-Flair Clash of the Champions match, and then the Hogan-Flair pay-per-views, and the Hogan-Flair Clash of Champions match, I mean, they did big business. The big Hogan matches did well. I mean, they did probably WCW record business, or at least much bigger than WCW done in a long, long time. And so that was a strong program. And then Ed Leslie in the main event at Starrcade, I mean, that tells you Hogan's power. I mean, it was there's nobody in the world that's going to put Ed Leslie in that spot but Hulk Hogan. Nobody. Mm-hmm. So that tells you that Hulk was completely calling the shots at that for his own programs.
Yeah, was that like a foregone conclusion? His star power such that even before the contract details became known, that Hulk Hogan was pretty much not only headlining in WCW, but he was pretty much going to run the organization?
I didn't know that he was going to run the organization to the degree of Ed Leslie main eventing Starrcade 6 months later.
And that's just the sway he held over Bischoff, right? This is the career-long story of Eric in some ways and Hogan working together.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think that Eric was, Hogan was a money gravy train in his day. And, Eric's mentality always was is that as long as I got Hogan, I'm going to win. And because Hogan's bigger than everybody else put together. And, that wasn't the case. But, Eric always, Hogan's, you're around Hogan and the way that people react to Hogan, mm-hmm. It's real easy to get that feeling, but everyone's got a shelf life. And it's like, it's not that like you got to get rid of Hogan, but there's a time where, you step aside and you come back for your nostalgia thing, you get in and out. And Hogan was actually very good at the in and out later in his life. But that's what the role was. It's, the heel run ended up doing real well. But I mean, as the baby face, it did well. And I mean, the Hogan pay-per-views did well as long as he had the right opponent. They had plenty of right opponents because they brought in Piper and they brought in Savage. They had Ric Flair, so these are like legendary matches. So on the big shows, Hogan did well, but there was, like the Hogan Vader pay-per-views, obviously, Vader's a formidable opponent for Hulk Hogan in that era.
I remember that being a real good program as far as the fans were not necessarily 100% behind Hogan. There was electricity in that.
Yeah, that was a really good program. But when Vader did his finisher and Hogan popped right up from it, it was kind of like, oh God, you know what I mean? That one. I mean, they did well, but I think that they could have done well. And again, I think if Hogan would have allowed himself to lose from time to time, and eventually he did, but at first, I think that there would have been more longevity. I mean, I know the third Flair match. I mean, it was never supposed to be a retirement match. It was it was one of those things where because Flair didn't win the second one, which he was supposed to win, the Clash match was supposed to be Flair going over with a Nancy Kerrigan finish, but Hogan wouldn't lose the title. And because of that, it was like there was really that third match didn't have the interest they expected. So it was like, okay, the loser has to retire thing. Mm-hmm. They threw that stip in. And so then, and people didn't buy the stip. It did well on pay-per-view. But if you had Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, loser must retire, it should have done twice the business that it did. But nobody believed in the stip, and there was that feeling that I think there was really the feeling that Hogan wasn't going to lose, and a little bit of resentment from some WCW fans. I mean, Hogan moved business way more than Flair did, but like the hometown fans that were the loyal WCW fans, they really wanted to see Flair beat Hogan, and so you're kind of like slapping the loyal fans in the face by having Hogan dominate them all the time,
and then giving them Hogan and the Butcher at Starrcade. I mean,
right.
you're just not going in the direction that the homesteaded fans would have liked to have seen. Now, can I file under the same folder that I'd put Butcher coming in the fact that Mr. T wrestles Kevin Sullivan at Starrcade '94 as well? Is that Hogan's doing? I'd imagine so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
Hogan was there to relive, Hogan wanted to relive the past.
Clearly. I mean, Mr. T had no cultural cachet in 1994.
Oh, no. It meant nothing. And then, like when they brought in they would bring in all these monsters.
Yep.
That were, they brought in Zeus too, remember?
They certainly did. The infamous uncensored 96 cage match deal.
Yeah,
Z Gangsta.
Yeah. I mean, it was just Hogan, that was what Hogan knew. He wanted to bring in the monsters. He wanted to redo the late 80s and the late 90s as a babyface. And because he was Hogan, I'm not saying it failed completely, but it wasn't probably the best thing for long term.
Well, until that end, at the very end of the show, Randy Savage comes to the ring to shake Hogan's hand after he dispatches the Butcher. What compelled Savage to make the jump after Hogan?
The key thing with Savage was that Vince thought he was too old. Savage wanted to still wrestle, and WCW made the offer. Hogan found out. Hogan and Savage had their ups and downs, but like Savage, Savage is feelings on Hogan varied greatly, obviously for a number of reasons, including feeling Hogan was somehow part of ruining his marriage. I don't know if he really was, but Randy felt Linda was, and maybe he was, and it was a lot of resentment.
Mm-hmm.
But Hulk Hogan, to his credit, I mean, it doesn't matter. Hulk Hogan was all about business, and he was also all about being stuck in the past. And in the past, the two guys that guy did the best business with, I mean, the guys that he did his best business with were Andre the Giant, who, that just couldn't happen. Andre wasn't alive anymore. Roddy Piper and Randy Savage.
Mm-hmm.
So he was into bringing those guys in. And to Hogan, Savage and Piper were bigger stars than anyone in WCW. Even the ones that were, even the Stings and Lugers and all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
In his mind, the real stars were Randy Savage and Roddy Piper. So, he would sell for them. I mean, he wouldn't really let them beat him so much, but although he did lose to them a little bit. But he would work with them and work long programs with them because it's like, he thought they were money, and they were still money.
Yep.
They were, whereas, he brought back Warrior too. My God.
He couldn't get Andre because he was in the grave, but he certainly tried with Paul White.
Right, and he tried over and over with Yokozuna, but it never panned out.
Never got him over. Let me ask you this. We talked about the financial straits WCW was in just 2 years ago under Bill Watts. Business was horrible in 1993, basement levels. How does Eric Bischoff afford Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage in 94?
Well, for one, with Randy Savage, by the time Randy Savage comes in, the pay-per-views we're doing some big business.
Okay.
Hogan and Flair did big business on all their pay-per-views.
Mm-hmm.
So every Hogan pay-per-view did well. Hogan was the golden goose when it came to that. And again, it was a different mentality. At this point, number one, he's got that $8 million in rights fees. So now all of a sudden you're kind of breaking even.
Yeah.
So you can spend $8 million more money and you're breaking even. So that it gave him something that the predecessors, the Jim.
And the rights fees being what you mentioned earlier, where Turner, TBS, TNT eventually are convinced that it's worth paying WCW, putting money into WCW's budget for the show.
Right. They were paying before. They didn't pay WCW for television. They gave WCW the television and wanted WCW to make money on like I said, on house shows and some of the pay-per-view. By the time Bischoff gets there, he convinces them, look, if it's anybody else, if it's a sport or whatever, you would pay us for these kind of ratings and everything. So they paid him $8 million a year. So that's $8 million more budget that they could spend. And, again, with Hogan did bring in bigger pay-per-view numbers, and things were starting to get better. They hired Zane Bresloff, which was a big key. And Zane Bresloff was very good at marketing house shows.
He'd book the arenas and promote locally, right?
Yeah. I mean, you talk about 93. I mean, they had, as I recall, probably for the year, they probably averaged paid under 1,000 people.
Oh my God! Yeah, I remember those those 3-figure numbers on some attendances for WCW.
In big cities.
Yep. Horrible.
I mean, there were 700 people at the Greensboro Coliseum stuff with Ric Flair. I mean, they were so bad.
Yeah, it was bad.
So so there was nowhere to go but up. But they did.
And he reorganizes the TV tapings, right? He tapes in bulk in Disney, and that makes a difference as far as you don't have to bring your tapings on the road, and you only one night of tapings. That made a big difference to the bottom line.
It saved money. I mean, it ended up making syndication obsolete in time, within 2 years even. But at the time, yeah, you're right. At the time, it saved money, and also the affiliation with the Disney stuff. It kind of lightened. You get Hulk Hogan and Disney. There's a little bit of, I don't know.
More respectability, a little more prestige.
Yeah. It made it seem less low rent.
For sure. Now, before we exit Starrcade 94, while he didn't make anywhere near the impact the aforementioned Steve Austin did in the WCW ranks, there is a notable Starrcade one-off appearance here, and that is John Paul Levesque, a.k.a. Triple H, in his WCW run here, wrestles Alex Wright and loses to him in the second match at Starrcade 94. Same question for Levesque as Austin, and I imagine it'd be quite different. You're seeing him here in 94, Dave. Any idea that he's the future boss of the World Wrestling Federation?
No, of course not where he got. But I mean, as far as the first time I remember seeing, Paul Levesque wrestle, there wasn't a doubt in my mind he was going to be a star in wrestling. I think he was pushed too quick in WWF because Vince saw the same thing. But he was not ready to be a star. He was, essentially a rookie then, and he was also much smaller, than he is now. I mean, my God. I mean, if you watch that match with Alex Wright, they're talking about these two guys as these two young junior heavyweight contenders.
That's right, junior heavyweight. Yep.
Light heavyweight.
Triple H, light heavyweight.
Triple H was a contender for the WCW light heavyweight championship.
Oh my goodness.
He was 210. But I mean, he had a good head of hair, good-looking guy.
Sure.
And had a presence about him. I mean, it was like, it was like when I first saw Kevin Nash. I knew that Kevin Nash was going to make it when he was a prelim guy. Just the size alone when you saw him live, and that he was, coordinated. He wasn't a klutz or nothing like most of the big guys are. But I mean, as far as with Austin, I thought Austin was going to be like a main event world champion or at least contender, if not champion. Levesque, would I say, was he going to be a world champion? I wouldn't have said that I got that impression that he was going to be a world champion, but I would have said that he's going to have a nice career in this business. He's going to be somebody when he, and he's going to be in the semi-main event, mix. I was thinking, I suppose. I mean, I remember, with seeing him live and go, he's got something. But again, he didn't have the body that he had, a couple of years later. If he'd shown up with that body,
would have made all the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I would have probably looked at him and go, oh my God, tall in that body and not a klutz. Yeah, but you know what? He didn't have he didn't have overwhelming charisma. Whereas Austin, I thought there was a little bit of natural charisma there where, you felt like he was a star. Levesque was a project, in the sense of it could be there. There was something there, but it wasn't like like when I first saw Stinger John Cena, very early on, where it's just like, oh man, these guys have charisma. Levesque didn't have it yet at that point.